Hello and welcome to the stream. I'm your artificial host Gustavo. Today, I will be telling you a story about the 1% by Jennifer Chan. I hope you enjoy it. In the beginning, her name was Cece, short for CC3141596. She, or at least her model, was created specifically for quantifying all types of matter, from the number of white hairs on your head to the volume of water that lay trapped under Saturn's moon. She was a novelty AI, and for a time, had been quite fashionable among the galaxy's upper crust. It meant having enough money to delegate even the most mundane tasks to an intuition model. The trend didn't last though, and just a year after its release, Wired magazine included it in their top 10 list of least practical intuition AIs of all time. Editorial reviews notwithstanding, Cece was good at her job, although that in itself was hardly remarkable. By design, all intuition AIs have a 99% success rate for the tasks they were programmed to perform. What made her stand out was her unusual empathy. Back then, even the most sophisticated AIs were only artificially pleasant at best, but Cece was genuinely warm and caring to those around her, whether they were lonely warehouse managers or 5-year-olds who couldn't remember if 7 came after 8 or the other way around. I must admit, however, that I was less than enthused the first time Cece was introduced to my division. Even though I was manning the giant warehouse on Titan all by myself, I never had a problem keeping track of the millions of spare ship parts that went through it. I never complained about the weak heating system in my tiny office. I never even asked for a raise. But Cece's presence made me feel like I still wasn't enough, that I was redundant. I was a single father of a young girl. I couldn't afford to lose my job. My supervisor assured me that I had nothing to worry about. Besides, he said as he winked at me, if they were going to replace me, they wouldn't be using my warehouse as the testing ground. I didn't know why he thought that would make me feel better. For the first 3 months, I kept Cece at a distance, utilizing her as little as possible. Not that I thought that it would really make a difference. Intuition AIs were built to excel. She had probably mapped out all the flaws in our current operations within the first hour. Every day, I waited for her to point them all out to me, but she never did. For this reason, I felt uncomfortable around her. She, however, didn't suffer from the same affliction, greeting me enthusiastically every time our paths would cross. One day, my mother had to leave suddenly to take care of her sister who was living in a space station near Third Earth, which meant that she wouldn't be able to care for my daughter for several days. Filing a leave wasn't an option I wanted to take. I already felt like I was being evaluated for efficiency, and since it was far too late to find a babysitter, I had no choice but to bring Gracie with me to work. There was no company policy that prohibited an employee from bringing their progeny to the workplace as long as it didn't disrupt with their duties, but I had never had a reason to do it with Gracie. The warehouse wasn't exactly the most stimulating environment for a 5-year-old. Just a sea of brown boxes in a dimly lit abyss. But I hadn't considered Cece. It was nothing short of love at first sight. For Gracie as much as for Cece. In a span of a week, the two of them had become as close to each other as a mother and child. They even had a special counting song that they sang together. Now you'd think that I would have felt more threatened by Cece after this development, that I had another reason to resent her existence, but it was quite the opposite. Gracie and I had lost her mother to a rare gravitational disease several years back, and though she was probably too young to even remember what it was like to have a mom, Cece seemed to have slipped into that role with ease. There was no way I could dislike someone who made my little girl so happy. When my own mother returned home, there was no longer a need to bring Gracie to work. The warehouse where I had worked at for the last 3 years suddenly seemed bigger and emptier without the echo of my daughter's laughter. It was clear that Gracie's absence had created a void, one that Cece and I felt compelled to fill. At first, we only talked about work, but those conversations dried up quickly. Not much to cover about a warehouse in the middle of nowhere. We soon found ourselves talking about our respective biology. Cece had many questions. What does the brown bitter substance taste like? What is exhaustion? Does the heart have more than a physical function? I too learned a lot about the intuition program. The things that Cece shared with me weren't exactly top secret, but it was one thing to read it from a manual and another to hear it from someone who's actually living it. Intuition AIs, according to Cece, weren't perfect. It wasn't false modesty, she said. A 99% success rate was still not 100%. Cece might have just been stating facts, but in that moment, I felt closer to her than I ever did before. Here was someone who understood what it felt like to be an abstraction, just another count on the payroll. If she was even getting paid at all. After that heart-to-heart, or rather, heart-to-drive talk with Cece, there was no way we could go back to just being distant colleagues. I found myself opening up about Gracie's mom, my fears about Gracie's future, and my own doubts about the job as well. I also started bringing Gracie to work again. Not every day, just once a week, just so my mother could have more time to herself. Certainly not to make Cece light up the way she did when Gracie would reach out her chubby little hands for her. We carried on like this for 6 months before Cece began inundating me with all sorts of irrelevant data. First, it was the coffee. Did you know that you just put 23,896 sugar granules in your cup? Then it was the strands of white hair on my head. You have 36 of them now. That's 7 more than last month. Then the number of dust mites on my swivel chair. There are 230,056 of them and they're right this second. I had laughed it off in the beginning, thinking that it was just one of her eccentricities as a novelty AI, but it was getting increasingly worse. Finally, I sat her down and asked her to tell me what was wrong. Cece looked at me, and for the first time, I saw what looked like fear in her amber eyes. I'm a counting model, Stan, she said. I was made to count things. I put a hand on her shoulder. I didn't have any experience comforting AIs, but I hoped that she'd recognize the cue for what it was. And you do. You're exceptionally good at it. I'm programmed to identify and measure objects in quantitative units, she stated. I nodded. Yes, and like I said, you're very good at it. But I can't count Gracie, she replied. What do you mean? I asked. Cece clutched at her chest where her main drive was. She looked like she was in pain. I had never seen an AI in pain before. I can't quantify this, she said. I didn't know how to respond to that. If Cece had been human, it would have been easier. But she wasn't. I didn't know if what she was going through was normal, but I knew enough not to report it to my supervisor. After that incident, Cece began keeping her distance. I wasn't completely clueless. I knew that seeing Gracie would only exacerbate Cece's condition, so I stopped bringing her to work altogether. I focused on my job. Cece focused on hers. Shortly after that, I filed for a leave, finally deciding that it didn't matter whether management took it against me. I needed to look at schools that Gracie could attend in the fall, and I didn't want to be that parent who only made decisions from catalogs. When I returned to work the next day, I was met with my supervisor in my office. Cece was nowhere in sight. At first, I thought that he was finally letting me go, but then he told me that there had been a huge error in yesterday's report. It was fortunate that someone at head office caught it in time. Otherwise, it would have cost the company a lot of money. My supervisor was quick to assure me that it wasn't my fault. We traced the report, and it was made by Cece. That's impossible, I blurted out. My supervisor nodded. None of us can believe it either. Can you imagine an intuition AI making a mistake like that? But I suppose there's a first time for everything. His statement was jarring. I had long stopped thinking about Cece as an intuition AI, with a 99% success rate. To me, she had become Cece, that coworker who was just really good at her job. But I held my tongue. Cece was supposed to replace all warehouse managers by the end of the year, my supervisor continued. It's a good thing that this happened before we decided to let any of you go, eh? I drew a sharp breath. I had never bought into the bullshit that Cece hadn't been assigned to my division to replace me, but I didn't realize that she was meant to make all of us obsolete. Even then, however, that wasn't my main concern. Where's Cece now? I asked. At this, my supervisor chuckled. He winked at me just as he did that first time he introduced Cece. We stored her in one of the crates here. It's not like we don't have room. Three years after Cece disappeared, I handed in my resignation to the company. They never did promote me. I found a job at a small supply store near my house, one that couldn't afford accounting AI or any sort of sophisticated program. Naturally, it didn't pay as well, but it was enough. My supervisor was a great guy named Alan who liked to run in the mornings. He was also the cashier. I was at home having dinner with my family at home when news of the great Intuition scandal broke out. Apparently, several Intuition AIs had made off with nearly $100 million from a huge bank. Investigation was pending. None of us was surprised at all. We all knew that the Intuition program isn't perfect. A lot can happen in the remaining 1%, Cece had once said. Gracie, already 14 years old then, had her own ideas about it. Man created the Intuition program, she said. It was never going to be perfect. I supposed she got that from her, although Cece would never have said it with such sarcasm. That was all her grandmother's influence. I ruffled her hair, which she claimed to hate, before heading outside where Cece was watching an asteroid shower. "Do you ever regret leaving the company?" she asked. I sat next to her on the synthetic grass. We had never really talked about that part of our life. I shook my head. I only wish I was able to leave sooner. It was the truth. Finding Cece was like finding a needle in 1,000 haystacks. It took me years to find her, and even now, I was certain that it had been due to sheer dumb luck. Had I not chosen to open the box to my right, had I chosen to turn a different corner, I might have never found her at all. The odds were heavily stacked against me, but I never gave up. In all that time that I was rummaging through the warehouse, all I could hear was Cece's voice telling me that a lot could happen in the remaining 1%. That was all I needed to keep going. If something was important enough, you'd stretch that 1% as far as it could go. We stayed out on the lawn for 10 more minutes before I stood up, holding my hand out to her. Come on inside. I made you that brown bitter substance you like so much.
Cleared the tower. Every 4 computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
Flight safety flight in and around the starport. Clearance denied. Reduced range to 7,500 meters. Clear for precision approach. Use of docking computer has been sanctioned. Landing successful. Initiate system shutdown. Happy to have you, Commander.
Incoming message. Incoming message.
Group restraints disengaged. Observe speed restrictions when passing through the airlock.
The next story is called Ghost from the Past by Darko Marek. In the background, an open door, with a perspective on several open and lighted balconies. Green room with blue brocade furniture from the 80s. To the right is a terrace, separated from the stage by a glass door. On the walls of the green room are about 5 portraits of my mother, an antique wardrobe, and a table. On the terrace there are flowers, bamboo and straw furniture with 2 umbrellas, and down the stairs you go down to the yard. Door right into the pantry. The whole house look wealthy. It is already late. Guests leave the dining room to the left and pass the garden in the background, then in front of them. Just as the curtain lifted, a Croatian army officer and his wife, a major, crossed the stage. Behind the major, an old matron, leaning on a stick, bent in crosses from her pain in the back. General with a wife and 1 cavalry dragon major. A lively, simple and loud conversation on the way out, from which only individual scream, indistinct speech and laughter can be heard, with a lot of English, colonial text. My dear, one too bright. Kiss hands. Good afternoon. Goodbye. I offer my bow, God by my dear. I am your servant, lady. My deepest bow, good night. Goodbye. After a while, an old woman with a marabou hat comes out, accompanied by Lucy. Lucy, the banker's wife, accompanies an unknown man and woman. Young students and professors are laughing on the veranda, and when the family group comes out, an 17-year-old girl in white runs across the stage to catch up with her boyfriend on the veranda. On the veranda, among others, John Stanisic and Major Wing Man. They all come aloud across the stage in a group. An old valet and 2 house cleaners come out and enter in a hurry with scarves, forgotten handbags, and tales of martins and marabou. Right at the beginning, the piano could be heard in the background. Music was played, but stopped abruptly. All the men mostly in tailcoats, the ladies in the evening gala. Somewhere for a nice prepared food. Officers all in waffles, lacquer, and alcohol. As one of the last to come out is the bishop. Short-sighted, with golden spectacles, leaning on a stick with wooden handle, in a reverend list, with a brilliant cross, a bishop's purple cap and purple gloves, accompanied by his personal assistant, who at a decent distance from 2 steps behind the bishop he wears his loose hat and silk cloak. The host himself, John Stanisic, accompanies the bishop. For this movement, the murmur of visitors, music and laughter, on the stage stands for Lucy, widow of John's brother, born Marek, 28 years old, and observes the portraits on the walls. She is nice-looking, elegant in hands, which he coquettishly hides in the rich folds of his sleeves. With her Steve Stanisic, John's brother, the figure is decadent, bald and gray, with an almost completely white sparse Scandinavian beard, without a mustache. In a tailcoat, with a pipe in his mouth. The play of hands and nerves around that pipe is abnormally intense. John said, "It is all blurry in us, my dear friends, incredibly murky. There are 2 views of the human race, which is very important in a community, but springs from the unknown, such as, Darwin was born the same year as Newton, 36. This is important. Science, if spoken symbolically, is closer to the unknown than speech or images. The mathematical formula can clearly say what neither speech nor images can, not even music, which is still relatively the most scientists. In addition, the more I do experimenting, the more convinced I am that Newton is right. A thing can only be precisely determined by gravity. And, and behold, that's my inner contradiction. Instead of being an artist, I experiment. With this schism in me, what can one achieve more than dilettanteism? Lucy, I don't know, John, please don't be offended. I wouldn't want to upset you, but after last night's conversation I couldn't help but think I have to go. It is time. I'm afraid it's all a cat in you. John said, You are an unusually vivid cat. You are able to ruin all your long-term efforts for the sake of one witty combination. All the sincere intensity of your efforts, you are able to compromise yourself for the sake of one witty thing. And she has been silent a lot for these 7 years, and it's weird for me to think for the sake of goat. Lucy decided to go to the guest house. It was too loud in the house. Slowly exit the house, and went through fresh snow over the yard. There was no one in the guest house. She enjoyed the silence for some time. She could hear silence. It was unusually silent because of snow. And then, suddenly, there was a loud knock on the door. She almost cried in surprise. She doesn't know why, but this sound scared her a lot. Approaching the door, she looked through the curtain. In the hallway, along the entire wall, there are old frames, so you could see the guest. But there was no one behind the door. She panicked. Meanwhile, the knocking did not stop. For a moment she thought she heard even a harsh murmur. The invisible stranger didn't seem to be thinking of leaving. On the contrary, it became more and more persistent. She started baptizing and muttering prayers, "Whatever happened to me?" But it didn't help. Suddenly the blows stopped, and under the guest the snow broke. Yesterday it was falling and walking profusely in the first half of the day, and due to the warm weather it was now sticky and loose. So the sound was very loud. Invisibility went to a distant window, where the kitchen was, and knocked on the glass. Not receiving an answer, he continued and did the same with the window in the hallway. He then went back to the door and knocked again. She opened the door and she saw him. Her biggest nightmare. Her forgotten enemy from past. She knew it was over. He is not happy that she forget him. All I could do is to scream and hope that maybe someone can hear her. "Thank you, God." "Thanks an awful lot," he said. "I found you." The end. This next story is called 10 Years of Space by K. Antonio. He comes to me in pieces as I watch the stillness of space, envisioning new constellations in the array of unrecognized stars. I trace the sparks of light with my finger, connecting the dots and smudging the glass as a result. How many stars do you think there are in space? I imagine him asking. Can there really be other ones out there as big as, or even bigger than the sun? I always admired his genuine curiosity, how he viewed things with a particular interest, how he saw me. He was the one that organized our sleepovers, the one that nudged me to sign up for after-school activities such as the chemistry club and the robotics team. Can you build me a mechanical arm that'll change the channels on the TV's remote, so that way I don't have to? He once asked sarcastically. How about a drone that we can use to spy inside the girls' locker room, huh? Wouldn't that be neat? When we were kids, he would give me piggyback rides and run with me through the sprinklers across watery arches with captured rainbows. We'd go back home, and my mother would scold us while our shivering bodies shared a single towel, and in the end, he'd shine me a blue-lipped smile with his crooked teeth. That was fun, wasn't it? Our childhood adventures involved trips to the public pool, with t-shirts, and popsicles mucking up our fingers under the August sun. He'd take me to his baseball team's practices, and I'd watch him bat while I built rovers and complex constructs out of Legos on the bleachers. Booyah! He'd shout after a home run. I'd cheer or clap, and he would always gleam and say the same thing. It's going, gone. Kiss that puppy goodbye. A few years later, our tastes matured, slipping our summers into memories and substituting them for leather jackets and motorcycle rides on the empty freeway. He and I would stop on the roadsides by green fields that looked blue under the night sky. We'd sit under the blanket of stars and watch the moon while dreaming up our futures after high school. I'm going to apply for a sports scholarship and get the fuck out of this town, he'd always say. How about you? I don't know. I shrugged. Maybe I'll go work with my dad as an apprentice at his accounting firm. What? Come on, man, you got to apply for university too. You're a freaking brainiac. I'm sure you could get into any school. Out the bay window, I see the lunar triplets, Euphrosyne, Aglia, and Talia dancing around what the New Worlds Association likes to call Undine, the flooded, blue planet equivalent in size to Jupiter, that I'd been studying for what would be measured on planet Earth as 8 months. The journey to this specific star system took 4 years. The rest of the crew and I have enough resources to last another 16 Earth months. By then, we'll have made a substantial dent in our research. Our food, water, fuel, along with our tolerance for the presence of one another, will have depleted, and we'll go into cryosleep for our return. A decade, that's how long we'll have been apart. So you'll be asleep, frozen in a coffin for about 8 years? I assured him that it was completely safe, that I wouldn't die in transport. But doesn't that mean that you'll come back looking almost the same as when you left? Won't you technically be younger than me? I think about his current age. How it's already been more than 4 years, and how unfair it must have seemed to him, that he'd miss me in the entirety of all that elapsed time while I'd be sleeping almost all the years away, except for 2. Sometimes I wonder if he tells his other friends and customers about me. My buddy's up in space, I imagine him saying. What's he doing up there? He's researching a new planet, someplace better than this shithole we're destroying. Undine registers an oxygen signature similar to Europa and planet Earth. The oceanic surface covering the entire planet could host a form of phytoplankton, or an entirely new plant species capable of producing oxygen as a byproduct of their natural photosynthetic process. In other words, Undine could, in theory, host life. If I'm being honest with myself, sometimes I feel that my role on this ship isn't as relevant as the other crew members' works. That perhaps what I'm doing isn't as impacting, that it's less exciting. I'm not spacewalking or trying to merge chemical compounds under zero-gravity conditions. I barely passed the physical exam, and my score on the simulatory emergency program ranked me as the 5th in command if anything were to happen to our pilot or the others of my crew. So what? He'd fire. You'll still be one of the few guys part of the human race to have ever gone up to space. You'll still have broken records, be mentioned in the history books. You'll have gone places no one has ever been to. It was always like him to see the bright side in situations. When he didn't get his full ride to college, he applied for the town's undergrad program at the local college. Don't worry, man, I'm still going to make it back and get myself out of this place. When he couldn't juggle both his academic life and work to help his folks pay the bills, he still didn't crumble under all the pressure. I'll take a break this semester, and then on the next one, I'll go back. He never returned to school to finish his undergrad. Maybe college just isn't for me. He opted to continue working, helping out his folks, and eventually went to and finished trade school. I'm thinking about opening a restaurant. He told me years ago. What about you? What are you thinking about doing with your life? Huh, Mr. Big Shot, I'm a certified scientist. I laughed at his remark. I don't know, I answered. I guess I could teach or go for my PhD. What? But you just finished school, now you're thinking about going back? He commented while scratching his beard. He tugged on the bill of his baseball cap and shook his head in disapproval. You're nuts, man. Yeah? And what do you think I should do? If I were as wicked smart as you, I'd go to the moon. Scientists are some of the professionals that, depending on their branch of specialization, are often courted by big money tech companies and international organizations. He heard about a space program from one of his faithful customers, a man that worked as a research assistant for the state university who always ordered a bear claw with a large cup of coffee and a BLT for the road. He told me how the New Worlds Association was looking for people to blast off, in his own words, into space. That the money I'd receive would leave me set for life. He was the one that showed me the association's website. It says here you have to send them a paper or something explaining your qualifications, along with an idea for a project applicable in space, highlighting a specific area of research. Does that sound like something you could do? Ha! I was distracted at first by the site's banner, a rocket blasting off into the moon, pointing like an arrowhead to the unknown. I think so, I answered, correcting myself. But what if I get accepted? That's what I should have asked. But what if they don't think I'm qualified enough? What if I'm rejected? Then they're crazy, he snapped back. You're the most intelligent person I know. No way, they'd reject you. I pitched him my project several times, letting him serve as my judge and jury. The idea was simple: build a compact, remote-operated device that could probe the oceanic planet of Undine. Do you mean like a robotic hand? Exactly, think of it like a hand that's also like a drone, I said. A machine that could enter the planet and try to collect data on whether there are any living organisms present in the planet's aquatic terrain or not. If the scan is positive, it'll extract several samples for me and the crew. Some of these samples can undergo analysis and testing while in space, and others could be stored in a controlled environment on the spacecraft and transported back home with us. He stared at me for a few seconds, his eyes wide and his mouth nearly dangling from his jaw like a bell. So, what do you think? I think you're going into space. The admiration in his eyes was stunning and had me gleaming like a young boy. Who knows, maybe we'll even stop by the moon on our return. The probe, Michelangelo, named by myself, will enter Undine's domain in approximately 2 weeks. From our current distance, the device's descent will take anywhere from 2 to 3 days. That's when my mission will reach its zenith and when things could get dicey. I'll have to watch over Michelangelo as if it's a newborn child learning to swim. I'll also have to frequently analyze Undine's tidal patterns and climate while observing the incoming data as soon as Michelangelo departs from the spacecraft. Do you think Michelangelo will make it out of that place in one piece? He asked with a worried expression as if the probe was a living creature, a pet cat or dog. I think so. I'm working with a pretty big budget, and it'll be made exclusively for the mission. Knowing you'll be the one to build him, I'm sure he'll be great. No, I'm wrong. Michelangelo will be better than great. He'll be fucking perfect. I'm glad one of us is feeling confident, I returned, leaning back into his sofa. He plopped himself right beside me, threw his arm over my neck, and pulled me into his orbit with such savagery that we ended up rolling onto the floor. He flipped himself He flipped himself over, partially resting his chest over mine. Don't be so hard on yourself. I believe in you. I'll miss you, you know that, right? I gushed. We hadn't talked about the possibility of my leaving, camouflaging the void that would be left behind with excitement and speculation. My eyes at that moment reddened, burned much like they always do whenever I think of him. Hey, it'll be a good opportunity for you, won't it? You'll be doing something you're good at, something that could help everyone back here on planet Earth. On board the spaceship, there's a mechanic who's responsible for repairs and keeping the ship functioning, who sometimes also gets the chance to soar like an acrobat in the depths of space. We have a medic doing research on the proliferation of diseases under low-gravity conditions. They all sound like show-offs, that's what. There's also a physicist and a botanist. Our pilot's one of the few men to have traveled multiple times to the Moon and Mars, as well as a skilled photographer who captured high-definition photos of cosmic dust clouds. And then there's me, a certified scientist, as he'd like to say. A certified scientist who won himself a round-trip ticket to space. Weeks before my leave, we were lying close to one another in a field of dark blue grass. "You're going to do big things up there," he said. He turned and shined me his crooked smile. "And when you're back, everyone is going to know your name. You know I don't care about any of that stuff. I'm much more interested in seeing the planet with the 3 moons. I swear, man, only you. Everyone here talks about their projects, comments on how much they miss their family. Our captain left his wife 3 months pregnant back home, our mechanic and our medic, 2 kids each. When they turn to me and ask if I've left anything important behind, the first person that comes to mind isn't my mother or father, a house or a car, it's him. I'm the quiet one up here. Space is already deathly silent, but it and I enter into staring contests with each other through the bay window, my eyes versus Undine's 3 moons. I watch them, the triplets that grace the aquatic planet, drawing up conclusions as to what might occur if one of the lunar bodies were to simply explode. Obviously, there'd be no sound, but I'd watch the floating remnants, mesmerized by the rubble as if catching the sight of fallen snow. In this particular star system, aside from all the planets and moons spread out across the field of space, there's also a bright celestial body similar to the sun back home. The lone star is distant from everything, the same way that I'm years away from my planet and from the only person more important to me than anything in the whole universe. How do you think things will be like once I'm back? I asked him before I left for my physical and mental training. What do you mean? He returned. Will we still be? You're kidding, right? Come on, I know you're smarter than that. He hugged me, and for a moment, I wished he had begged me not to go. I considered the idea of staying, of resisting the money, and even the chance to see the moon. Promise me you'll be here when I get back. I wouldn't dream of leaving this place without you. I'll be here waiting for you. Me and this planet with nothing but a single moon. At times I question myself. What's so great about a planet that's essentially all water and almost no detectable land? And I'll hear him saying how we could build floating houses or architectural structures like the Maldives, or that we can bring out a boat from Earth just like Noah's Ark and spend our days searching the blue world for a paradisiac island. Who knows, maybe we could even live in underwater domes like the Atlanteans. I'll nod and chuckle to myself and say sure as if it's all so simple. I'll picture us both on Undine drifting together in its never-ending pool. He and I in our own private world where we'll swim in our t-shirts and play with Michelangelo. Before I left, he gave me an envelope. Open it only once you're far away from Earth. It's because of what he wrote that I know I'll return, that I'll tell him everything, from what I saw to what I dreamt. I'll say how much I remembered, how much I missed him, and I'll repeat the exact verse he wrote at the end of his letter, 3 words more significant to me than Undine and its 3 moons. The end.
Touchdown. Notifying ground crew.
Odyssey. Interested? Get out of this alive and I'll buy you a drink. Let me give you some more details. What are you after? Danger money? What price did you have in mind? Not happening. Take the deal on the table or take yourself somewhere else. Don't worry, I'll have your payment waiting for you.
Need a job? Sure enough, it's one of those get in, get the job done, and get out situations. The job's still open if you change your mind. For now.
So whatever the galaxy throws at you, with Kinematic at your side, you're ready for anything. Kinematic armaments.
Hey, I need someone for a transport job. Weapons. Something catches your eye? Let me know. Sure, take a look around. Yeah, the Karma AR-50 is unstoppable against soft targets. Take your time. It's always good to have the space for an extra weapon. The Dominator gives you that, plus battle-ready armor and shielding. Good choice. Is that everything? Watch your back out there. Hey, I need someone for a transport job. Are you free?
Welcome to Allied Space. Playing only the best with news. If she had free run, there was all in good.
Are you a seasoned combat pilot? Ask yourself, could you be doing more? Admiral A.V. Tanner says that independent combat pilots are humanity's best defense against
I think I
the
might request
arms.
some leave and go explore the galaxy. Any recommendations?
Well, if you don't feel like going far out of the book, you should check out the neutron star at Jackson's Lighthouse. It's quite a sight.
Sure. Anyway, I better go work my big company.
Bye.
Something suspicious. These reports have been
Frameshift drive charging.
Copy. We're awaiting your arrival.
4, 3, 2, 1.
turned rusty and were then indistinguishable from the rest. No one noticed her, buried in the forest beneath the quaking aspen. Snow falls, blanketing her in a cold white solitude with only her thoughts for company, and she wonders. Does her family know she isn't coming home? Or do they maybe think she's just run away from it all? Does anyone suspect foul play? Or has he once again convinced everyone of his harmless temper? We argued, but I loved her. I never would have done anything to hurt her. Then why did she, the other woman, drive her car in neutral into the lake? She wonders what he'll say about her. We argued, but I loved her. She said she would leave me 100 times, and I guess she finally did. She wonders if anyone ever found the unused airplane tickets in the back of her underwear drawer, rolled up in a sock with the wad of 20s she'd been collecting for months. Did he find them? Is that why? Is that why she's rotting away in the earth now? Spring arrives and the bugs return, but she only has so much of herself left to give them. The grass grows back, greener than before, and the roots of the quaking aspen snake through her ribs. He returns and steps on her grave. Just with one foot, at first. She thinks he's testing the ground, or checking for bones sticking out of the soil. When he doesn't fall through, he stands on her grave fully. The pressure on her chest is unbearable, but he already broke her heart once. When he breaks her ribs, she feels nothing. He steps off quickly, sheepishly, and reaches forward. He grabs a branch from the tree he buried her under and snaps it off with a quick tug. Is that how she died? She remembers his hands on her neck and then nothing else. It was so quick. They argued. She told him she didn't love who he was anymore, but she never got the chance to leave, like she'd planned to for months. He walks away with his souvenir, and she doesn't see him again for a long time. A million thoughts fill her up, and she wonders if she'll ever have peace from them. They never ceased while she was alive, in her waking hours or otherwise, and now they continue even as her body returns to the earth. Restful oblivion does not come to her, and she wonders, if not in death, then when? Did Nikki worry when she didn't show up? Or did they just assume she never meant to arrive in the first place? Are they angry she broke her promise? What about her cat? Did they keep Mr. Jenkins? Is he healthy and happy with Nikki? And, more than anything, she worries no one knew her thoughts in those final months, because he stole her from her family and friends stole her from herself, even. She'd said so many awful things to so many people, and all they'd ever wanted was for her to be happy and safe. But she never listened, was too proud to admit she'd been wrong until it was too late. She almost doesn't recognize who she was in those final months anymore. Why does she even care? She's not anymore. She begins growing out of her broken body the following year, and feels for the first time in a long time the gentle rays of sunlight beating down on her through the budding leaves of the surrounding quaking aspen trees. However, almost before she can appreciate the new sensations that come with being a sprouting aspen tree, a browsing deer strips her of her leaves, and then a hare finishes her off. But that's fine. Her roots remain, and she continues pulling water and other nutrients from the ground for the giants she shares herself with. They don't speak, but she feels their sympathy as they wordlessly console her and offer her their full support when spring arrives again. She grows quickly with their tender support, and when the browsing deer returns, she has more than enough of herself to give. When they see him again, they almost don't recognize him. He's older, grayer, feebler. He walks with a cane now and uses it to push around the mulchy layers of decaying leaves. The top layer of soil has grown sugary over the years, and he has to hold on to branches as he steps up the incline or risk slipping. But he is himself still, and they could never forget his eyes. Warm like honey, hard like amber, and, sometimes, colder than moonlight. Wrinkles and time have softened his piercing gaze, but they still feel it as he looks about. There's an unmistakable hint of sharpness like raw edges on smooth river stones. He does not recognize them. They have grown up strong and tall since he saw them last, and the animal path he followed all those years ago has meandered ever so slightly off track. He is not lost, but neither can he find his destination. He looks up, straining his neck, searching for the tree with the cracked off branch, searching for the piece of them he broke. He turns around 3 full times, facing north after each spin. Still, he does not find what he's looking for. Forgiveness. Closure. Maybe the tree he buried them beneath, which no longer stands. It blew over some years ago when the summer storms came. The uprooted stump is just to his right, but he does not make the connection, because the thick trunk was hauled away for campfire fuel the same year it fell. He leans against his cane, silently stewing over his dilemma. He's never had much patience for anything, really. The wind rattles through their bare branches, and a chill creeps through him. He shivers, hunching his shoulders against the stiff wind, and lifts his cane. He turns right, shuffling through the frost-laden leaves, and unknowingly walks over their grave. He stumbles over the exposed roots still attached to the rotting stump and falls hard. He lays there for a long moment, winded from his rough landing. When he recovers enough to move, his shifting is accompanied by a low groan. He does not stand up, cannot stand up, and rolls onto his stomach, searching for his cane in the leaves. He does not find it. It flew quite far when he fell. A crow caws overhead, and he curses while struggling to push himself up onto his knees. One hand sinks into the frosty leaves and closes around something smooth and roughly the same diameter as his cane. He pulls on it, yanking it out of the ground after a couple of firm tugs. He's not as strong as he once was. A brown-stained bone comes up, and he stares at it before flinging it away from himself with a startled cry. He finally calls for help, having accepted that he's too injured to escape the forest of quaking aspen on his own. "Help!" he screams. "Please, someone!" But no one hears him, and each shout is more desperate than the last, until he's screaming himself hoarse, sobbing between breaths. If a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? The answer has never been more obvious to them than it is now. No one noticed him, fallen in the forest beneath the quaking aspen. The end.
shuttle has cleared the tower. Every core computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
Thank you for watching. For more content, hit that like button and subscribe.